They say every nation has ghosts, but America's ghosts live in its bloodlines. They hide behind portraits, behind oak doors and sealed family names. They don't scream. They whisper. Through inheritances, through madness, through the quiet rot of privilege passed down from father to son. And if you listen closely enough, if you follow the genealogy deep enough, you'll find a truth more terrifying than any battlefield or haunted house. You'll find families that carried their curses like heirlooms. One such curse began in the heart of Virginia, long before the Civil War, before state lines and graves divided the living from the damned. The family name was Carter. To the public they were aristocracy, plantation wealth, political power, marriage ties reaching into presidents and generals. But behind the portraits and pearls, there were diaries that spoke of something festering beneath the Carter estate. Children born with mismatched eyes, voices heard in the attic, family members vanishing into the woods for days, returning pale and wordless. The patriarch called it God's test. His wife called it our inheritance. Generations later, descendants of the Carters found those diaries sealed in a false wall, a century of decay pressed between pages, and every line seemed to predict what came next. Madness, violence, and deaths that mirrored the past almost perfectly, a pattern that refused to die. It's easy to dismiss stories like this as superstition, as Southern folklore. But when bloodlines like the Carters intertwine with American power, their secrets don't vanish. They metastasize. Presidents, senators, and judges trace their ancestry back to these same haunted roots. And that's where this story becomes something darker than a ghost tale. It becomes an infection spreading through generations of influence. This isn't just about one cursed family. It's about what happens when the original sin of a nation embeds itself so deep into the family tree that even centuries later, its branches still bleed. And tonight, we're going to open that tree. We're going to follow the veins of the most cursed family ties in U.S. history. And once you've seen what lies beneath, you'll never look at your own surname the same way again. The Carters were not the only ones. Across the Potomac, another lineage was rising. One that would intertwine with theirs in ways neither family could escape. The Randolphs of Virginia. Old money. Older sins. They were known for their charm, their intellect, their taste for control. But buried in letters locked away in university archives lies something the history books never printed. The correspondence between Mary Randolph and John Carter, a cousin she was forbidden to marry. In those letters you can hear the beginnings of obsession. She wrote of the sound in the walls that followed her at night. He wrote back, "Our blood calls to itself. It wants reunion." Their union never happened, at least not officially. But months later, Mary gave birth to a stillborn child. And the midwife recorded something almost impossible. The infant's skin was marked from neck to ankle with dark, branching lines, like roots burned into the flesh. The midwife refused payment. She left the estate that night and was never seen again. From that point forward, both families began to unravel in eerily similar ways. Randolph men dying young, Carter women going blind before 30, land lost, marriages collapsing, suicides. Yet, every few decades, one member of either family would rise, powerful, charismatic, untouchable, as though the curse spared one to carry it forward. One of those survivors would later sit in the U.S. Senate. Another would preside over a court case that shaped civil rights law. History celebrates them as visionaries, but in family records their mothers describe them differently. The marked ones, the chosen blood. What makes this so disturbing isn't the superstition, it's the precision. These patterns repeat with almost scientific rhythm, the same illnesses, the same dreams recorded in journals, entire branches of the family waking at the same hour, reds of miles apart, claiming to hear the same voice calling from the same field. And when researchers tried to trace where that field once was, they found it beneath the ruins of the first Carter plantation, a place now erased from all public maps. Some say the family's wealth was built on stolen graves. Others believe they were simply haunted by their own cruelty. But as we move deeper into this story, the line between haunting and inheritance begins to disappear entirely. By the dawn of the 20th century, the Carter-Randolph lineage had scattered across the East Coast, their estates turned into ruins or museums. But what survived wasn't the land, it was the blood. And in the quiet corners of American bureaucracy, that bloodline kept showing up. Birth records, military rosters, law schools, the same surnames threaded through power like veins beneath marble. In 1928, a genealogist named Edwin Lowell was hired by a northern branch of the family to assemble a heritage book. His goal was simple, to prove their American nobility. What he found instead, he never published. In his notes, later discovered among his personal effects, Lowell wrote, "The bloodlines converge unnaturally. Births coincide with deaths that shouldn't align. Names repeat without explanation. Sons bearing the same names as cousins who never lived to adulthood." His research hinted at something that would terrify even the rational mind, that the family had been quietly breeding within its own tree, generation after generation, maintaining what they called purity of inheritance. But purity in this case came at a cost. Children were born with what doctors of the time called melancholic disposition, a polite phrase for psychosis, epilepsy, and self-destructive mania. In one report from 1933, a physician described a patient, a Randolph descendant, who claimed he could remember things that hadn't happened yet. When pressed, he spoke of an old field where the roots breathe. That patient later vanished from the asylum. His file was stamped closed by request of family. The Carter-Randolph connection continued to appear in more official places: a Supreme Court justice in 1947, a state governor in 1956, a defense contractor during the Cold War. All carried that same ancestral signature, though they pretended not to know. It wasn't until the 1970s that a curious journalist working on a forgotten piece about Southern genealogy stumbled onto the same pattern Lowell had tried to hide. He traced the bloodline, found the diaries, the medical files, even a series of sealed letters between the families that referenced something only called the arrangement. He never finished the article. He died in a car accident on a clear road in daylight. His notes were lost, except for one photocopy found years later containing a single line. "The field is not a place, it's a memory they share." By the late 20th century, the Carter-Randolph descendants were no longer Southern aristocrats. They were senators, financiers, lawyers, soldiers, their names diluted through marriage, their origins disguised by time. But time does not bury curses, it merely changes their language. What once looked like madness became stress. What once was marked as possession became genetic trauma. And yet, generation after generation, something still followed them, an inheritance too dark to name. In 1989, a woman named Eleanor Pierce filed a police report in Fairfax County, Virginia. She claimed that her husband, a descendant of the Randolph line, had been sleepwalking. Every night, precisely at 3:11 a.m., he would rise, walk to their backyard, and begin digging. He said nothing. He simply dug, sweat freezing on his face, until dawn. When asked what he was looking for, he said, "They told me the roots are closer now." The officer dismissed it as mental illness. But the digging didn't stop. Not until the night he collapsed and died of sudden heart failure, shovel still in his hands. The autopsy revealed something strange. The man's fingernails and teeth were stained with iron-rich soil, the same composition found only near the original Carter estate. Eleanor later burned their home and was never charged. Around that same period, a geneticist from Duke University began researching hereditary psychological disorders in old American families. His data, meant for academic study, revealed anomalies. Identical genetic markers appearing in distant relatives who shared no recent ancestor. When he cross-referenced those markers with public genealogy records, he found a single common thread running back over 2 centuries: the Carters, the Randolphs, their descendants, still marrying, still merging, as if something deeper than chance was drawing them back together. He contacted Ed, one of them, a quiet attorney in D.C. When they met, she listened to his findings, then calmly told him, "We already know. We've always known. It's not a disease. It's a duty. A week later, the geneticist withdrew his paper. His peers assumed it was due to academic pressure, but his assistant found something scrawled in the margins of his draft in a shaky hand that didn't look like his. Roots breathe. Blood remembers. The field is waking. By the time the 21st century began, the curse had adapted perfectly to modern America. You wouldn't find it in the plantations or the family Bibles anymore. You'd find it in the DNA tests, in the ancestry databases that promised to tell you who you are. Thousands of users uploaded their saliva, hoping to trace their roots back to kings, warriors, founders, and among them were the Carters, the Randolphs, and dozens of families whose branches had fused over centuries of quiet inheritance. What those people didn't know was that the databases flagged an anomaly, a cluster of genetic matches that should not exist, too close, too consistent, as if a single bloodline had replicated itself across time, wearing new names like masks. A technician at one of the companies leaked the data to an anonymous forum in 2013. Within days it was gone, deleted from servers, archived posts, scrubbed. But the fragments that survived described something impossible. Individuals born decades apart, across different states, all sharing an unbroken paternal marker, one that hadn't appeared in any recorded sample outside the Carter family since 1802. Around that same time, an archivist at the Library of Congress uncovered a sealed box misfiled in a Reconstruction-era collection. Inside, brittle letters, some written in a looping, elegant hand, others in feverish scrawl. They referenced the same arrangement, but now it was described as a pact. "We keep the field alive through our unions," one read. "We ensure the soil never sleeps." The archivist reportedly brought the box home to study. 3 months later, he was found dead. Cause: asphyxiation. His apartment walls were covered with old family trees drawn in pen, connecting names across centuries, looping in spirals rather than branches, and at the center of every spiral, a single phrase: "The first root returns." Even now, descendants of these families live quietly among the American elite. Professors, investors, politicians. To the public they seem ordinary, but in private many report the same nightmares, the same waking visions, a field of dark soil stretching endlessly, whispering beneath their feet. If you're still watching, you're already braver than most. Tell us in the comments, what would you have done if this was your bloodline? Would you keep digging, or would you try to bury it? The truth, if you can still call it that, began to surface not through historians or journalists, but through those who couldn't stop dreaming. Over the past decade, psychiatric hospitals in Virginia, Maryland, and North Carolina have quietly logged dozens of identical cases. Patients from unrelated families reporting the same recurring vision: an open field, a house with no doors, and the sound of roots moving beneath the ground. Their last names differ on paper, but when the lineage is traced, every one of them carries fragments of the same ancestry. The Carters, the Randolphs, the blood that never rested. Some of them wake up speaking in an accent no longer heard since the 1800s. Others write compulsively, pages of unfamiliar handwriting. When psychiatrists compare samples, they match the script of Mary Randolph's long-lost letters almost exactly. One patient was found carving names into the wall of his cell, dozens of them connected by thin lines that spiraled inward. At the center, again, that same phrase: "The first root returns." You could call it mass psychosis, you could call it shared delusion, but there's something that refuses to fit within medicine's explanations. Surveillance footage from one ward captured a man standing motionless for 6 hours, whispering in an unknown dialect. When linguists reviewed the recording, they found it resembled an archaic blend of English and Algonquian, a language spoken by the indigenous people who once lived near the first Carter plantation. That tribe vanished in the 1600s. Their burial sites were never found. And when excavation teams surveyed what little remains of the original Carter estate in 2019, they discovered faint geometric patterns carved into the soil beneath the foundations. The design matched sketches found in both family diaries, and eerily, the spiral drawings recovered from the asylum, the archaeologists stopped digging after 2 of their team members fell ill, both suffering hallucinations of whispering roots. The project was abandoned without explanation. Today, that land is sealed, fenced off, marked as private federal property. But satellite images show something unsettling, a faint discoloration spreading through the soil, circular, expanding year by year, as if something beneath the surface is still alive. And if you listen to recordings taken nearby, late at night, there's a low hum, too steady to be wind, too deep to be machinery. Locals say it's the earth breathing. They say curses die when no one remembers them, but this one was built on remembrance. It thrived on record-keeping, diaries, letters, photographs, data. Every attempt to document it kept it alive, every name written, another root fed. That's the cruel intelligence of it. The Carter-Randolph curse learned to evolve within the very thing America worships most, its history. When you trace the bloodline forward to now, to 2025, it's not just names and DNA anymore. It's institutions, it's companies, it's laws. The descendants hold chairs in universities that teach history rewritten to hide their own. They sit on boards funding genetic research. They run the foundations preserving their ancestral estates under the guise of heritage tourism. But if you visit, if you walk those restored halls, something feels wrong. The air carries a hum you can't quite place. The portraits seem to breathe when the lights flicker. Guides warn visitors not to wander near the old tree line. They say the ground there still shifts at night. A few years ago, a genealogical society in Richmond attempted to publish a new family registry, the most complete record ever assembled of early American lineages. Midway through the project, its servers crashed. Every file linked to the Carter and Randolph families was corrupted, not deleted. Replaced, each name overwritten by the same phrase repeated endlessly: the field remembers. Since then, people who've researched too deeply into this bloodline tend to disappear, not violently but quietly. They move away, close their accounts, stop answering messages. Their last emails often say the same thing: it's bigger than we thought. Maybe it's just coincidence. Maybe the curse isn't supernatural at all. Maybe it's a story of power and guilt that repeats because no one ever breaks the pattern. But if you felt that chill while listening, that sense of something ancient and unblinking watching from just beneath the soil, maybe you've brushed against it too. Because the Carter-Randolph line was never about one family. It was about what happens when the past refuses to stay buried, when the sins of a nation take root in its blood and keep growing, generation after generation, waiting for the next willing heir. And somewhere tonight, beneath the fields of Virginia, the roots still breathe. The earth remembers the names, and it's whispering for someone new to answer.